Right, guys, we'll kick it off there. Hopefully, everybody's safe and well and had a good weekend so far. We're going to present the latest episode now in the On the Court webinar series. Got Richard Ward today presenting pivot play and making space of pivot principles in futsal. Most of you don't know who he is. It's plays currently for Pro Futsal in the NFS. How many caps have you got, Wardy, for England now?
I think that's plastered on a couple of my slides actually, so I won't give any secrets away.
Okay, we'll let you crack on with that one. But I'd say vastly experienced within the game, played abroad as well in Spain and in Italy. So as I say, hopefully it'll be really engaging, a lot for you guys to take away and introduce either to your pivots or if you're a player, trying this stuff out yourself. But say take a listen. Hopefully you enjoy it. I'll pass it on to Wardy now.
Cheers, Gaffer. So yeah, played abroad, I think, in the loosest sense of the word, but thanks for that. And firstly, I think there's quite a lot of people online, so I'm very grateful that you've took this time away from your loved ones to spend some time listening to what I've got to say. Hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully it's not just any excuse to get away from those loved ones because you're sick of them already, which is, I think, often the case. And throughout this, if you've got any questions, do please add them in the chat, which I think is available. If it doesn't come up, Juan, would you mind shouting out if there's any questions as I'm going through?
Yeah, as long as you don't mind, I'll jump in wherever, as you said before.
Yeah, just come in as they come up. So as we go, guys, if you don't feel comfortable coming off mute or whatever, if your English is like Chavi, just type it in there and we'll answer those questions as we go. So, like I said, there you go, bottom of the page, 63 caps for my country, playing as a pivot, also played a bit of as a winger. For those of you who've seen me play more as a false, played for quite a lot of clubs, started out Sheffield FC, learned from Janio Cruz, spent a lot of time with Brunel. I'm sure everyone knows Janio, big name in the game. Took a year abroad, went to play in Barcelona for a year, learned a lot there. I think that definitely helped me develop an idea of the tactical side of the game a lot more, playing in Spain. I'm sure those of you who've even watched a little bit of futsal in the professional sense appreciate the Spanish player very, very tactically compared to the other nations. So that really challenged me in my game on that side. Moved to Manchester, worked with a lot of the young English lads doing really well at the minute, as well as some of the older ones. Sam Richardson, Elia doing great stuff at the club there. Had a brief spell actually playing professionally in Italy, a club called Virtus. Quite an experience in itself. Returned back to play for Helvetia, where I was before Virtus as well. Quite a lot of success with Helvetia, and then joined Pro Futsal at the start of this season, where for those of you who keep up with the NFS have seen that's been quite a good challenge between Pro Futsal and Helvetia this year, which has been great, added a lot more excitement to the league. So I'm going to start with a couple of videos just to wet the whistle and blame Juan because I wasn't going to put any videos of myself playing, but he told me to. So this presentation is about pivot play, and I've got one or two clips just to talk about, which you'll see throughout the presentation. Edgy plucking that out the sky, to be fair. Russell told me to get these 2 goals in. I think there is only ones, actually. And last one before I bore you to death. Yeah, making a pass. And then the next one. Okay, so the way that I've split this presentation is looking at 2 kind of pillars. One of them is how you act off the ball, And I'll talk a lot about actually making space as a pivot, because that is how I think you're going to influence the game. If you can get space on the ball to either find a pass or make that shot. So in terms of how to generate that space, what you can do off the ball to do that, where that can come from, as you know, there's loads of different scenarios in the game of futsal. I've broken this down into a few, these being pressure on the ball, both good and bad, the actual team movement and team rotation. I don't go into that too much in this presentation, although that is key on how, as a coach or a player, you actually get on the ball if you're sticking to more fixed rotations, or you have specific patterns of play that you want to get into the game. That's obviously a key influence onto how you're going to land on the ball as a pivot. And the final one there is actually matching up as a player, either the passer or the recipient of the ball as a pivot, and how you exploit that on the court. And that's something that I don't really see a lot of necessarily in the National League. I know it's something that I have played against the international level, so it's something I think the game will develop with time. And this other aspect is how, once you have the ball, probably the more exciting part, how you actually generate that space and how you use that to your team's benefit. So if you're holding up the ball, if you're going to roll inside or out, or if you're going to do a fake turn to generate space for a shot. Underpinning all of that, I think, are two key things. Firstly is the situation that you're actually playing in with the team. So what the current scoreline is. That will depend, and that will influence a lot of how you act. You're not going to be turning inside trying to generate a shot if you just need to hold the ball for the last 5 seconds to win the game. That's obviously an extreme of it, and you'll get everything in between. But that is key when you're making these decisions and you're planning your game and you're coaching a player. And the second one that I've got there is, the point of this is to win. So by generating space, the objective is to go and score a goal, to go and influence you have your influence on the pitch, and to make yourself stand out and deliver what you're there to deliver, and ultimately for your team to win the game. So this is actually good people doing it. And I've included this right at the start just to give you an idea of some of the things I'll be talking about. We'll go through it at the end again, just to recap on what we'll talk about through these slides. If you haven't watched this game, this is Spain against Japan, and Solano pretty much walking this game and being a massive threat on the game. So if you want to watch that back, you can understand some of these patterns a bit more detail, taking the highlights. Obviously, if you watch a full game and you see it from different angles and the different replays, it gives you a different appreciation for it. Also, if I include some exciting futsal up front, you can fall asleep during the middle part. I'm hoping this isn't too grainy of footage. When I've watched these presentations, I think you lose a bit of the quality on the download afterwards, so apologies if that's coming through badly. Basically, it's Ferrao tearing it up. So if you can just Google Ferrao. He's I think he's the example, and he's shown that recently. I think he was best pivot in the world recently voted. Such a dangerous player. That's not the video stuttering, that's actually me pausing it so you can talk about that at the end. Sowing the seeds. Ricardinho banging one in. Sweet. Right, now into the meat, the details, some YouTube recommendations. Excellent. Okay, so off the top then, we're talking about off the ball as a pivot. If there's no pressure on the ball, how do you get on the ball? Simple. The way I've cut these slides out is just to a few stills, just so we can analyze the exact positions. Obviously, the game is fluid, so it won't always look like this. But I'm going to highlight a couple of the kind of things that you should be looking out for, both as a pivot as well as a passer, which are going to get you that space on the ball. So we can see in this first one here, the ball's actually on the, and I'm smoothly going to get myself a laser pointer. Excellent. The ball's actually on this side of the court, and you can see that two of the high-end players in yellow have gone across the ball. So this player is attracting two players to the ball. That means that elsewhere on the court, there's going to be a numerical advantage, or players are going to be out of position. Taking that forward a step, you can see that the player who's now received it after this pass back to the fix, he now has space, both from the player who should be pressing him, should be closer, as well as gaps between lines. So this is immediately a situation where you're thinking, can we get the ball forward and into our pivot? Why? To go and, firstly, it's going to get you territory up the court. You're going to go closer to the goal to try and score. But you're also going to make the front three players there, as you're breaking two lines, they're going to have to turn and face the ball. And then your supporting players can get up and support the pivot and ultimately affect the game in much the same way. And we can see that by having this scenario of the distance from the ball exacerbated by the distance from the winger from not cutting in the middle, the ball gets through to the pivot, and then you have the success that you're talking about. So if we just go back a couple of slides, you can actually see here the pivot, he's playing on the shoulder of the back man. He knows that he's not going to get the ball in this scenario, but he's trying to think, well, in the next pass, how can I land on the ball? So already here, he's trying to read, how can I help these two players once they get the ball? He's kind of expecting this guy to not give them the pass. And it's, again, reading his body shape and how he can disguise a pass. He could be the kind of player, you see Diego at Barcelona, who can thread the needle and he can just find that pass. So he might want to come in front of the backman in that scenario. But here he's pretty confident that he can play around with this defender and confuse him. So that when we do come through to the next one, he's actually now in front. So he's read the play, he's got in front there, and he's actually got a couple of meters from his defender, so his defender could be closer there to him as well. And in this scenario, Barcelona in the match, they were actually trying to press. So when a team is trying to press you, there's going to be more space behind those lines. So ideally, where you do have no pressure on the ball, you do want to be getting that pivot nice and high. Alternatively, probably more typically for the English game, you might be playing against a team who are sitting in a deep diamond. And I think in those scenarios, you are relying on the three if you're playing a 3-1. That is a pretty main assumption for this. You're having a 3-1 formation as we're talking about pivots. But this could apply to if you are playing 4-0 and you find one of those players in a pivot position. It all sort of applies. And again, it's a framework. You are, and a lot of people talk about that word, but it's in the game, it's fluid. You're going to be in different positions. So yeah, as I was saying, if you're playing against a deep diamond, the pivot, I think it's probably better to try and get in the corners and stretch the game to create the 3 players against 3 players scenario in the center of the court. That way they can try and use the numerical advantage. Alternatively, the pivot can come around and act more as a false and work in that 4-0 as well. Again, just options. It really is dependent on the scenario. But ultimately, if we're talking about a deep diamond, we're saying that the space in the middle of the court is going to be quite constricted. So the pivot has to come out and look for the ball in different positions. Okay. So the next one is when you actually have good pressure on the ball. Now, a lot of the time, when you do have good pressure on the ball, you're talking minimal touches. You're going to have to play what you see. You're going to have to try and be an option for your player and get around quicker. In these screenshots here, you've actually got a couple of players working on a kick-in on the far side of the court. So they could actually have already decided on a set piece that they're going to work on to relieve pressure. A lot of teams do that. Or they could just have principles that they stick to where we know that if we're in this side of the court, my pivot's right-footed, you have to be an option down the line. And they might work to it that way. So you can see here, they work the kick-in. Excellent quality of the screenshot, but there's actually the ball's been scooped over the winger here. So the next screenshot, you'll actually see the pivot and the scenario that they're in. Now, the team in blue, Valdepeñas, are actually 2-0 up against Barcelona. Valdepeñas considered the underdog in this game. So they're trying to, considering the game scenario, they just want to keep the ball as far away from their goal as possible. Hopefully try and score some more, but they're winning situation at this current moment. So when the pivot's landed on it here, he needs a couple of things from his teammates. He needs some supporting runs so that he doesn't get doubled up on. He needs his pass coming in here to be firm so that he can do something with it, not just floated. It's going to be a battle. And I think as a pivot, it's going to be a battle regardless. The Batman, if he's worth his salt, he's going to be trying to get physical, close to you where he can. Make sure you don't have a touch in there, because ultimately that's his job, is to stop that, to cut that out, because that's how you, as a pivot, can influence the game and turn on him or do some of the things we'll come to on the later slides. But this kind of pass here, the scoop down the line, it's often on. It's quite hard to cut it out. The defender could be marking in front of the pivot, in which case the space could be on this side. The winger could be deeper and make that pass a bit more difficult, but then the pressure wouldn't be as good on the ball. So this kind of mid-range scoop is quite common in futsal. So as a pivot, getting used to deal with that, I think, is a very key thing. And making sure that when you secure it, you actually give yourself quite a firm base. You can see here, this pivot, he's very, very vertical, very upright. It's probably quite a difficult ball for him to control and get it under in one, as the defender's so close to him. But if he can get a firmer base there, he's going to do better for his team. So in this scenario, the pressure is good. You're asking yourself, why is the pressure going to be applied? Firstly, teams come out to press as a pretty much a game tactic. You see pro futsal, we do that a lot of our games. This season, we'll go after the team, we'll try and hunt them down regardless of the scoreline. Other teams might prefer to act on the counter, or they might have to do this when they're losing. So considering the different game scenarios, ultimately the pivot's job here is to secure the ball and get some territory. Try and get something. You're not expecting them to score necessarily. So you don't want to be turning and being over extravagant in this position. Obviously, if you can do that, great. But try and play the percentages, I think, would be the advice there. And again, talking about how you could help the team, you might want to come further down and act as a false and try and flatten the opposition team out, make that press a bit harder, as they'd have to cover and balance. So the last point here is around how you actually hold that base. You can see this is a bad example. We will see some good examples. But you need to be aggressive ultimately, but in a fair way. You don't want to be giving away lead fouls. And again, that's something I've probably been pretty bad with in my career. But trying to get a nice, strong base, get the legs out, get the bum and the back right into the defensive player. Use the elbows to keep yourself balanced. Technically, you can't keep a straight arm, but referees don't always give that. And then you want to be using the sword to manipulate the ball to try and keep it as close to you as possible. You can see that Daniel there, the number 6, the player closest to the ball, he's going to be coming in to cut this one off as well. So he's got minimal time. So anything you can do to get that ball under, thinking futsal, thinking try and control with the soul. And you can see here, this is ultimately a success for Valdepeñas. The higher up the court, their team has the ball. The player does lose the ball, but the odds of things to try and tackle the player and keep the ball in possession there for Barcelona, it's tricky for them to do that. So team movements. Now, I haven't gone into too much detail on this because I think it's going to be somebody else's presentation. Yes, that's an easy cop-out. But ultimately, depending on how your team want to play, that's how you can manufacture space for your pivot. So the one I've got here, and it's quite a common thing, is you've got Inter Movistar in the blue there playing 3-1. They've got, it's actually Humberto who's playing as a pivot in this 4. But he's come round and he's actually acted as a false to clear space out for the player who did cut through. And again, this is actually Daniel a couple of years ago. And he's landed on the ball. And you can see here, this player could be closer, but the reason he probably isn't is because he might have been balancing if Humberto's just come round or otherwise. But ultimately, this will be something that Inter have in the locker. They probably don't even have it in the locker as in terms of a tactic. They'll have done it since they were younger. But you have Humberto coming in this direction, clearing out the space, and Daniel coming around to fill that acting as a pivot in this situation. Again, could be something in a 3-1 or a 4-0 if you're acting as a pivot. The key thing now would be for this player to try and get space, or alternatively, he's probably looking to come in this gap here for a 1-2 and attack here and try and have a 2v2 scenario here. Ultimately, you're trying to stretch the game again as a pivot to try and make sure that you have space for the player on the ball. Ultimately, the more space, the more time you have on the ball, the better decisions you can make. That's quite a clear principle of futsal. So yeah, I spoke about you could have different team rotations in here. It could be a part of a set play to how you do this, both to attack as well as relieve pressure. So the questions you should be asking then in these scenarios, I think, as a pivot is, could you get players to clear out space for you to generate this, again, talk about this 3-1, the 3 in line, sorry. Communication is key. Obviously, these two players are pretty hot on it. We don't know if he's actually telling them to clear out or not, but I think he's probably expecting him to be behind him. But working on this in your pairs, he knows to clear out because he's going to land on the ball. He knows he's going to have a lot more time on the ball than if he stays here as a solid 3-1. Alternatively, as Humberto Stone, could he actually clear? He doesn't have to cut. Doesn't have to wait for the shout to cut. Could he just clear, knowing that where you are, situation on the court, there should be a player behind you? Something you should be thinking, again, comes with experience of playing with similar players or having a team framework. And the final point I've got here is, how is he actually going to get himself available for a pass? So in this situation, we've come around as a false, but some of the things you should be thinking if he does want to stay more as a fix is, how is he using feints? Is he playing behind the shoulder of the defender like we saw before? Or is he coming in front and pinning him to try and hold the ball up a bit more? And I think timing is a massive part of this, as well as communication. I think those are kind of two undervalued, or don't really talk about them too much. We don't really work on them. It's quite difficult to work on how you tell your player to clear out for you as you're coming around. It could be taught, I think, if you're looking at this from a coach's perspective. So yeah, timing, understanding of the game, knowing your team movements if your team do play in quite a prescriptive way, or if you only have a couple of rotations to work on, making sure you know them and actually know them rather than, yes, I move in this position on the board, so I need to move in this position. It's kind of the when. What do my opposition do? What's the pressure like on the ball? There's loads of factors that go into all these different things, and they ultimately come into the same thing, really. So yeah, not going to go into actual team rotations you can use as a pivot. I'll leave that to the coaches, but just something to talk about in terms of how you act as a pivot in that team position. Okay, like I said at the top, Solano did some bits in this game. He was a bit naughty. And one of the questions you'd say as a Japanese coach after this game is why. You can't really, well, hopefully you can see it there. I know it's probably a few pixels on your screen, and if you've got a Samsung like Russell Goldstein, it might be even harder. But you can see Solano is considerably bigger, more physical than this Japanese backman. He's already in front of him, so he can pin him all day. He could have probably two players coming at him, and he's strong enough to do well there. Spain have done a bit of a rotation probably beforehand to create this space, and Aicardo's going to feed the ball in. And I can see that Spanish players happy that Solano's in this 1v1 situation. They're happy with this matchup. Yeah, they're going to come and support, but they're pretty confident he can do something in the scenario. He's going to use his sole of the foot to back into the player because he can do that. He's sort of trying to mark him with his arms, but he's not doing a very successful job as he's gaining the territory there. And then he takes a brilliant touch in the side, rolls it, and bangs it top corner. So the question here, the point I'm trying to make here is, if you've got a good matchup and you're doing well in that game as a pivot, try and use it a lot more. You'll see in games that one player is marking you well. If he's marking you well and you want to get on the ball, maybe try switching into a different position, get a different player to mark you. As a coach, could you match that player up in a different way so that you have your strongest pivot against their weakest backman, or your fastest pivot against their slowest backman? Try and make an advantage that way. I think it's a bit pointless to try and do something which isn't working. Idea of the definition of insanity is doing something time and time again, expecting a different outcome. I think in this situation, Spain were happy just to feed the ball into Solano and let him do his business. It's pretty simple, but just try and think how you would identify that as a pivot. So understanding what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, as well as key. Try and analyse their backman if it helps you. If you know that your strength is your strength and you can do it 9 times out of 10 again, regardless against the defender, that's fine. Go and own that. Go and go and take responsibility on the court, demand the ball. Keep doing that. Keep getting your team that success. And this role here that Solano's done, we'll talk about that because he's actually not facing the attacking goal, and he's managed to gain space here, about a meter to shoot the Japanese goal. That's pretty impressive technically as well. So Spain knowing that, firstly, he's got the matchup, and then secondly, technically, he can do that. It's a massive weapon for them. Similarly, again, probably not as appreciated is the value of the passer and the disguise that this passer can use. I've played with a lot of him, Stuart Cook, probably what, if not the best English player we've had. The disguise he can do to his passes not only makes him find more passes, but it creates more space for the team. And the disguise of a pass is essential when you're playing as a pivot. I love playing with him because he can always find that pass forward. Jordan Edge is doing very well at Manchester as well. I always feel like he can find you. But it's the disguise that they put on the ball. So you can see here, Inter against Barca, massive game. Bebe is applying decent pressure. They're kind of expecting Ferrat to come and get the ball here. So Inter could sort of be placing a bit of a trap. You can see he's really close. He kind of knows what's going to happen. Next thing you know, Diego's dipped inside and curled it around two players, and he's found Ferrat through on goal. So it's really powerful. And again, this is the ultimate dream state, I think, that a lot of players have. But just being able to have that individual link up, so Ferrat and Diego plays how many games together, he knows he can do this. It's a minimal trigger for them to actually work this out. And it's probably Ferrat just being quite loose around the defender, knowing that if Diego comes line, I'm going to clear out anyway so that he can go through with his strong 1v1. So he appreciates what this player can do in that sense. He also knows that if he dips inside, yes, he's got this pass here, but he's probably got this speculative pass here. He's cutting the line down the defender. He probably doesn't need to be here anymore. He's identified that really quickly. Too quick for the backman. And then he lands on it and then lobs the keeper and scores an amazing goal. So, the other half of that is actually insane. The point to illustrate what I'm trying to get across here is if you're working with a player, he either knows your game well, or he's got a certain movement, like a side roll and a pass that he can do technically that will get him that half yard. Use that as a weapon for your team in the game. So if Diego could just do a quick right and left, as we've seen, as we've probably learned on the futsal court or taught as coaches or just watched, and then Ferrat can probably hold his ground a bit more, and we can get into that situation where we're getting players cutting through and generating space that way and gaining territory. As it is, it's why you watch the game, really, to watch Ferrat do things like that. And that kind of covers the off-the-ball side of things. Again, a whistle-stop tour. There's loads of different factors involved, but I'm just trying to highlight some of the things that I've tried to learn and study through my playing of the game and learn from different coaches and managers and things like that. And the stuff that I'm continuously trying to work on and improve as well, just to try and get to that high level. I think if you can watch the LNFS a bit more, if you don't already, then I definitely recommend that. You can learn a lot from different players. So this second half, I'll pause for breath. Is there any questions coming out thus far? Can't actually see if there's any in the chat. So, Juan, fully on your shoulders if there is. Excellent. So, moving past that branded slide, we're going to talk about some of the technical parts of being a pivot, which I think is probably the more exciting parts. Stuff you can actually work on by yourself, in isolation, in quarantine, however you want to. All you need is a ball and some space. So the first one, fundamentals of being a pivot, being able to hold up the ball. So we've seen from the off-the-ball stuff, the pressure here isn't good enough. The player on the ball here, he's going to be able to find a forward pass. So how's a pivot can you get on the ball? We can see here he's actually secured it quite comfortably. Player is playing off the shoulder of the player, talking about fake movements. The other player's not just pivots. He's securing the ball and he manages to roll it off and get a shot away. A terrible shot, but never mind. But the key thing to highlight is, and I hope this comes through on whatever monitor or screen you're looking at, but we've got a player and he is holding the ball up. How is he doing that, you might be thinking? So the first one is he's got his head up. So he's obviously taking the off the ball stuff to one side. He's actually got on the ball now. What are we doing as a pivot? So he's got his head up. He's trying to understand, where are my players? What's the situation that I'm working in? There's a load of things happening at this moment in time. He's not got much time to think. He's got his head up. He's trying to figure out how am I going to make a decision? Regardless of pivot or whatever it is, unless you've got your head up, it's going to be very difficult for you to make good decisions. The second thing here is he's got his hand out and he's trying to feel for the defender. He knows if he's going to try and attack the ball from him, in which case he can possibly turn either side. He knows how much time he's got before he has to give a pass because he's going to get taken out or challenged, or his balance is going to be put into question. So he knows the defender is. He's got an appreciation for how much time he has on the ball. Third thing here, manipulating the ball with the sole. That gives him the ease to flip it left or right, as the approaching player would need, or if he's going to turn into a shot himself. And the fourth thing here is he's actually alert to what his player is going to be doing. So we saw in the previous slide, he's actually lost him in his line of vision. So he thinks he's coming on the left. Defender's got his left eye looking for the defender. So he's going to run through on his right. The Valdepeñas Batmans appreciate where the space is. So here he's looking at the man. He's going to make the good decision on where the ball's going to go. So he's going to roll it inside. Players got the superiority over the defender, and he's going to get a shot away. Success for your team as a pivot. Excellent pivot play. You look at some of the good pivots who do that. You've got obviously the Spanish ones. In the English game, Parksy's on the line. Parksy was always brilliant at it. You could just chip the ball into him and he'd automatically win his fight. It's a high percentage play for you as a team. Reone with England is similar. He's going to win that fight. He might be smaller, but he knows how to use his physicality to his advantage. He can secure that ball and get your team territory or threaten him behind. Okay, so none of the boring passing stuff anymore. This is Solano in the game against Japan. I think it's the other game, actually, the second game. He's got his matchup, and you can see here the defender, he's absolutely terrified. He's miles away from him. And even with 2 meters, he's going to do a roll inside, which is going to let him have a shot in goal and ultimately score. But looking at the actual detail of that roll is quite interesting. And then as I was pulling these slides together, I took a lot more time to try and slow it down and appreciate it so I could try and digest it myself before trying to explain it. And that was quite helpful to me as well, because as I've seen this technique quite a lot, I don't use it as much. And I was trying to understand why it doesn't work when I try and do it. So I'll try and explain that. Hopefully there's no defenders listening. So I've got 3 stills here, which again, regretting the format of this presentation for doing that. But, I'll come to you in a second, JK. So you can see I've got 3 stills here. I've got the first one. He's now actually took the distance away from the defender, and he's got him where he wants him to be. He's really close. He's got his hand. He's feeling for him where he knows he's going to be. He's looking to the right. The body position is really interesting here. He's actually, the way he's situated here, he could be anywhere on the court and he could turn either side. That's how he's basically built his game. So he's super comfortable in this position. He could be there all day. He can go either way, and he knows he's going to be sharp enough that he's going to get half a second on the defender, and he can ultimately make a decision from that point. The detail I found here is he's actually rolling the ball, and his body shape isn't really changing much. The defender's looking at his kind of back and his lower back. He's trying to see his feet, but he's not actually getting that view really. And Solano's taken lots of touches in the initial movement here. So he's taken 5 or 6 slow touches into the defender, or kind of consistently paced touches into the defender. And on the 5th one, he's rolled it. He's caught him by surprise. By the time he reacts, he's actually 2 meters here from Solano's weapon of a left foot. So the way that this has worked is he's taken the numerous touches inside. You could do this from a standing position, but I think it's going to be easier to react because he's using his sole numerous times, and then suddenly he gets that half yard. He's using his body between the eyes of the defender and the ball, and he keeps his body shape in a pretty consistent position throughout to maintain that disguise. So those are the details. I think often when I've tried it, I've not done as many touches here, or when I've been Spanish word, can't think of an English word, using the sole to roll the ball back. I've not gone with surprise like Solano does in these clips, and we'll see that at the end as well. This touch is also centimetre perfect. He's rolled that from here to where you can see the final position of the ball is here. So he knows that there's an element of risk there. If he rolls that too strong, he's losing the ball. If he loses it too weak, he has to take an extra touch, and he loses that advantage that he's created for himself. So some of the things he needs to be thinking about are: is there enough space in the centre here? Quite clearly there is. The defender's very happy staying ahead of the ball. Something that coaches will definitely look at, see if it's the right thing to do. And when he's doing that touch, he's actually rolling it backwards slightly to even give himself a bit more space from the defender. And he knows that he can wrap this shot pretty well, both corners. And if you see footage of him, he can do this all day. Those are the 3 points I spoke about. And yeah, you can't really see it here, but he just wraps his top bins. And there's the best animation you're going to get. So that's rolling inside. The second one, naturally, is rolling outside. Again, similar game. Excellent example. And we can see here Solano getting on the ball again, head up. Key fundamental here. He's got space, he can do that. Spain players are really helping him here because they're cutting through. They're questioning the position of these defenders. They're having to make decisions. If he doesn't go with him, then he can find a pass to him. He needs to cover. He's creating space for his entire team. Again, comes under team movements, how you support the pivot once he gets the ball. I've got a couple of stills which will highlight how he's done this turn, but as he's turning outside here, he's got that half a yard, and it is only half a yard this time, and he's managed to get a shot across. And he scored again from that angle with his weaker foot. So he does this pretty well. These are the two stills I think help understand help you understand how he's doing this. So he's gaining the territory again. So these little soul movements, not only is it just trying to lull the defender into thinking you're not doing anything so that you can make that sharp movement either side, it's actually gaining you territory. So when you do make your shot, it's hopefully from closer in. It could be a meter, could be half a yard. It makes a difference ultimately if you're trying to get the difference in this game. Futsal is a game of fine margins, as I'm sure many people have quoted previously. JK, you wanted a quote, you can use that one. Getting that half yard by soiling it backwards, that could be it between you scoring or your other keeper making a fingertip save. The first thing here, like I said, head up. He knows where defenders are, he knows where his players are. He's probably already decided he's going to turn. I'm thinking from experience because there's no real reason for him to turn here outside. And his players could have come for an easier shot. But I think he was firing pretty well in this game, so he knew he was going to do it. Again, he's got the defender sort of guessing. He can see the ball a bit more clearly now, but the ball is further away. He's got the player and a leg, essentially, 2 legs between the ball and the defender. So the defender can't really hook around and get it. Could question the defender's position here. Could he be defending this a bit differently? But ultimately, when you think about the outside roll, you're going to be using the ball that's furthest away from the defender. So you can see here the touchline on the left-hand side, he's going to be using his left foot. Well, it would be touchline on your right-hand side if you're attacking. Using the outside foot. And then ultimately, when you come to get the shot away, he's going to be using his right foot. So the ball's on the furthest side away from the defender. You're getting that half bit of distance. And again, haven't really spoken much about finishing in this video. Could be something for another presentation. Don't want to ruin everyone's material. But he's shooting across the goal. He knows he's got a defender who we saw the first attacker clear through to the back post. He knows he's got someone there if it doesn't actually go in. But he ends up banging it in bottom bins anyway. So fair enough. The last one here, and it's probably the most effective if it's done well. Got Faraon here, so he's what a person to learn it from. It's the fake. So I've got 3 different stills here. The first one is, again, it's the same principle. He's taking loads of little touches backwards, gaining territory, trying to confuse the defender. He's fully in control here. He's not even got his arms out. He knows that this guy's terrified of him. His head's up, completely in control of the situation. When he's been doing these little touches, he quickly pulls it back and across himself in the same movement. It's like he's going to go for the outside roll, but he brings it inside. You can see here he's got lots of space. The other 2 attackers aren't in here, but they're actually quite far away. So he knows he's got something to turn into here. How does he know that? He's got his head up. He knows how that team's defending, loads of different ways. He's taken this touch inside. It's all in one sort of movement. He's flicked it back and flicked it inside. And then he's having a nightmare. He's gambled on him turning outside because his outside turn is so effective. And he's also keeping himself between the ball and the defender the whole time so that he can't see it, but also so that he can protect the ball. And then he takes an extra touch and bangs it in from distance. So that's Varane. But the element of surprise as well with the shot, I think, is the key thing for a lot of these turns. If you can turn and shoot quickly, the keeper has less chance of being set. Likewise, the defenders. This shot doesn't end up being the best placed. It kind of ends up being this sort of just above the right keeper's right foot. Because he's done this all so quickly, he's caught him off guard. Defenders can't react. And it's Varane being Varane. Sorry, JK, you mentioned something there in the chat. I don't know how to get to it.
Right, Woody. So John's asked, coaching youth players into wanting to go into those pivot areas. At time you will rely on your three to find you, but it requires patience. What do you have to possess mentally to trust the three and not keep coming round or want to be involved in the build-up?
That's a good question, John. I mean, personally, I get very impatient, so I tend to come around quite quickly. I appreciate that might not be what the team needs necessarily. I do try and stick it as long as I can, but I feel like if I'm not getting the ball, it's because the pressure on the three might be too good. If the three are getting time on the ball, then I think there's potential for them to pass it forward. So when we spoke about the earlier slides around having good or bad pressure on the ball, I think being able to see the three have bad pressure on the ball, so they're actually having time to get their head up and try and create a pass. I think if you can see that as a pivot, then I think you're more inclined to let them try and rotate or do what they're doing, work on their partnerships to get some space and find that pass forward. Similarly, if you know that one of those three is able to find that pass to Skies or otherwise to you as a pivot, I think that's time for you can be patient. You will get the ball eventually. I think working with younger players, I haven't got a lot of experience coaching in that area, but I think if you can break it down and teach younger players, there's certain rotations that they can do or certain techniques and how to link up together, I think that's key. How you do that, smaller drills, I think, working in twos or threes rather than the full four, I think that would be difficult to immediately go in, especially with younger kids. You want to feed them at piecemeal, and probably talking as a pivot, talking about some of the individual techniques and how you get on the ball in each situation. You probably bring that in from a coaching side and say the defender has to mark behind the pivot to give them that extra benefit. Or you could even do drills, just not even with defenders, just getting them comfortable to come in these positions and working in this way. And then when to come round, you could potentially talk about the good and the bad pressure that I spoke about earlier. Did I see another question pop up there?
Yeah, there's another one. So it's quite an interesting one. David's asked, what makes an excellent defender against a pivot? When and how do they win the battle? And then also your thoughts on whether pivots would make best fixes at possession as they understand what the pivot is trying to do. So similar to the centers in the NBA who usually attack as the main pivot, and then they'll also defend the opposing center, and whether we should try that in futsal.
Nice, easy question, David. Thank you. Good evening. So what makes an excellent defender? I think from experience, what I hate playing against is a defender who's overly physical, referee's not giving you anything, and you have to just scrap. Those are horrible games. You're really in for a horrible game when that's the case. If it's probably a bit more, if it's being refereed correctly, I think a defender who can marshal you to one side or has you working on your weaker foot, if you have a weaker foot, I think that's very tricky as a player. If they're only giving you space on one side, for example, if you're a left footer and they're only giving you the left hand side, and they're only giving you the right hand side, it's going to be harder for you to control the ball in some of the situations when the defending team has good pressure. We're trying that loop ball that we had before. If they're trying to do it on a weaker foot, more likely that the possession is going to get turned over. Defenders who know the game really well are really tricky. Doug Reed, very physical, studies the game a lot. He knows that if you're going to try certain things, he knows that you're going to try different things. It's kind of patterns in play. And some of the international games I've played in, when the defender marks in front of you, if that team's got good pressure on you, it's very difficult. You have to end up coming down very flat as a false similar to what JK's point was, or you can try and go for that high ball because the pressure's that good. It's often tricky. And it's when I talk about percentages, you talk about how often that's going to come out successfully for your team. And I think if the defending team's doing that, I think that's very much in their favour. When and how. What was the second part of that question? Sorry, I've written when and how. Was that when and how the defender should try and win the ball?
Yeah, when and how do they win the battle?
So I'll talk about when and how does the pivot win the battle. So when, I think, you should be trying to win the battle at all times. You should be trying to be physical, keep your space, own your space. I spoke about having a really strong base, getting your legs really deep down, getting a low center of gravity. You can hold off anyone. If anyone's seen the England team, players like Liam Palmer-Freeman, Russell Goldstein, I think they're about 5'1", 5'2", but they weigh about 50 kilograms. But they're very apt at using their body, using their arms, and holding bigger players off. And that is a technique. It's not a case of just get bigger. It's a case of you have to work on how to do that. Make sure you've got a good balance so that you can get into that position and set really quickly. Playing with Brian Collis-Griffiths at Pro Futsal this year. He's about 5'1". He's got a very strong base, and it's very hard to push him off the ball. Which segues me nice into the next question around if a player who's a pivot should be a defensive fix. I think it depends. It depends on the player. I think a backman often needs to have a good tactical understanding of the game. I don't think it's utilised much as a top level tactic. In terms of a pivot will then become the fix. The game is very fluid to do that, and even when the teams do have the more defensive structure, once the ball goes out of play and they can reset, it doesn't happen too much. I think they could do that. I think you'd probably be looking at fundamentally tactical understanding. So, do they know when to come inside? Do they know when to press? Can they communicate well with the players in front of them? That's another key part of the game as well. I think communication is probably key with that. I don't think there's anything to stop it. I think if I find myself in the National League playing as pivot, and then as a fix because it's easier to do that position and try and marshal your players in front of you if you want to try and get the press on and you want to save legs if you're playing a few more minutes. I think a lot of backmen do well as a fix because they're sometimes more physical and they can get the ball well in that position. So yeah, I think there's nothing to stop it, but I don't think it's necessarily a tactic you try and employ.
Cool. Do you want to carry on, and then we can answer? We can come to the next questions after.
Yeah, it's only Liam asking me a question, so I'm happy to continue. I'm down to the end of this, guys. I appreciate I'm actually running on quite a lot. So the point that I've come up with a couple of times is game situation, and I initially was going to offer this out to the crowd for different ideas, but I think because of the time, I'll just quickly go through this. So if you're winning, losing, drawing, that's the simplest way of thinking about the game situation. What should you be doing? The questions I've got if you're a pivot in these different scenarios. So something you should be asking yourself. If you're winning, I'll quickly go through these. If you're winning, you want to be holding the ball. You don't want to be taking too many high-risk manoeuvres like the little fake turn if you're not really sure on it. If you're losing, probably converse. You want to be throwing a bit more to the wind. You want to be trying to get a bit more territory, try and threaten the game a bit more. And drawing again depends on what the draw means to your team, but you want to be trying to be an influence in the game and make sure your team have that pass out of pressure, pass forward, and ultimately be a good option as a pivot. Other things, numerical advantages down to 4 players, that's going to change your game fundamentally. You won't necessarily be acting as a 3-1. You could be boxing up if you've got that extra player. You could be acting at the top of a defensive formation for 3 minutes, or the back of a defensive formation for 2 minutes because you've got the player less. You're not going to really have the ball in that situation. So, don't just be a pivot. I think you need to appreciate the different positions on the court. Some of the things around the matchup as well are, if you're playing well or you see your players playing well, use them. They're on a hot streak. You see it in basketball, to pull us back to that quite a lot, where a player, sinks 60 points because he's on form. Keep giving him the ball. He'll keep doing well. Don't necessarily see that enough, I don't think. Probably from a coach's perspective, it's making sure the players who are playing well are playing. Or if you've prepared badly for that day, you're not feeling too good, make sure, you're not letting the team down. So firstly, try and prepare as well as you can. But if it hasn't gone well, external factors, make sure that you're letting the right people know and you're managing that. If you're the favourite in a game as well, or the weaker team, that's going to change how you're playing. We saw Valdepeñas against Barca earlier. They're just trying to stretch the game. Valdepeñas, they've got the lead. They want to make it last as long as possible. That low risk futsal, you see a lot in World Cups as well, where they're doing a lot of direct long ball. That'll happen a bit more. If you're the weaker team, stronger team probably trying to be more patient, trust in their strength in terms of their individual matchups. So as a pivot, stretching the game, staying further out of the thing. A few external factors as well, slippy court, bad balls, refereeing decisions. These things all come into play regardless of pivot or whatever, but make sure you keep you cool and you're doing the things that you've worked on as a pivot, not letting that affect you. See a lot of players let that get to them, and that ultimately turn a good performance into a bad one. I do then have a little summary of what we spoke about, followed by a short video. So we've covered the off-the-ball stuff, the on-the-ball stuff, technique, and the game situation very briefly in the last one. I appreciate. So I think the takeaways, I've rambled at nigh on an hour, so apologies for that. The fundamentals I'd say taken away would be make sure if you're a pivot and you're working on these techniques, spend the time to really appreciate the intricate details. Work with another player, ask them what's easy to defend, what's harder to defend. I think the key one is the quick soling of the ball into the turn. I think if you can work on that, I think that would make you more of a threat. If you need to come back and build from the ground up, look at the holding the ball stuff. How do you use your physicality? How do you get the ball to the pivot? If you're the three working with the pivot, how do you do that kind of thing? And make sure as a pivot, you're using your body, regardless of your size, to its maximum efficacy. Like I said, even the weaker players can be as strong as you need. So the questions that I've got probably for the group would be, and don't have to answer these now, is how can you coach this, or how can you learn this as a player? Do you make the most of the matchups that I've spoken about? I'm interested to know other people's thoughts on that. In particular, if you're playing well or if you're against a poorer player, how do you communicate? Do you work on communication with the pivot? Do you tell them, get on the ball now? Does the pivot demand the ball? Do you see that a lot when you're playing or coaching? What's the kind of footage likely to watch this back? Saw some really good stuff from the GFC, which I'm really looking forward to working with. No pressure, guys, but I want some really good stuff on that, please. And then finishing as well. Not really spoken about finishing. It's something that I have been doing a lot of work in terms of video analysis this last year to work on. You've probably not noticed that. But I think that's something that's probably worth going into in detail on one of these if anyone's interested. Questions?
Class, Wardy. Really, really appreciate it. So we've got loads of questions firing through, so we'll try and get through all these before people start jumping off. So Bruce has asked, on small courts, which I know is a big issue in the UK still, defenders may opt to defend ball side. What advice would you give a pivot to get on the ball in these situations? And also, as a pivot, do you prefer to be defended ball side or goal side, and why?
Good evening, Bruce. Thanks for the question. So yeah, I think small courts are the bane of my life. I prefer to get on the ball with time and space, as I'm sure any player does. So having the defender marking me goal side, I think, is definitely the preference. That's not to say that if he does mark you ball side, there's not areas to exploit. I was going to try and go into a bit of detail around Alex, one of the pivots for El Pozo, and how he generates space in behind the defender. He's so clever with it. It's the faking off the shoulder. I actually got a clip of myself in the video, which at the start, I do that, and Webby finds a great pass. So I think to answer the question, when the defender is marking you ball side, you are relying on your players to notice that and to then do the things that will help you get on the ball behind the defender. So either moving the ball quickly enough so that you can actually land on it ball side before the defender, or if you're actually got territory in the opposition's half, stretch the game, stay in the corners of the court. The backman can't follow you to the corner of the court because he leaves the centre completely exposed. I think Pro scored a goal against Bolton this year where Jeff's gone through as a pivot and he's actually stood in the corner of the court as Bolton was sitting quite deep, and then Dennison's found him with quite a flat diagonal pass because the defender simply can't follow him out there. So I know the courts aren't always the best here, but it's talking about some of the stuff I said around earlier on around if you're if it's bad pressure or the team's in a deep diamond, stretch the court. The space isn't going to be in the middle. And I know it's tricky as a pivot to be patient to do that, but you're relying on those three. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So Liam, your good friend, has asked a question. I don't know if it's directed completely to yourself. He's put, how important is it for a pivot to use both feet?
Even Liam. Well, as a 2-footed, I think I think you have to be 2-footed. I think you have to be 2-footed. I think it would help. I think it obviously makes defending a 1-footed player a bit easier. But we've seen Solana there, and he plays the game so well with 1 foot. Rarely see him need to control the ball with his right foot. But then, how does he actually get around that? He gets around that by having very good players around him, so that he can always land on the ball goal side. He does also come around as a false a lot more, so that he doesn't have to stay as a pivot if they're only offering him one side. So another player can cut through and threaten to be that more advanced option. But yeah, I think any player needs to be 2-footed. And Harry Kaplan, if you're watching, you need to start working on that right foot, please.
So Louis Melville's asked, what are the challenges for you as a pivot when you play international futsal as opposed to domestic futsal? As playing against, for example, Croatians Fix is a big step up from the NFS, and is the NFS preparing you for that?
Yeah, so I think it's a completely different game, NFS to international. And I think a lot of the guys who've done that step up can appreciate it's not only you're representing your country, there's all sorts of emotions involved in itself, but you're coming up against 12 players who are probably a lot more pumped because they're in that situation as well. There's a lot more on the line, and I think that draws out a lot more, both from adrenaline, but also the elite level that's expected of you. I don't think the NFS is anywhere near international. I don't think it helps. What it does give you is opportunity to try different things. So like I spoke about the different on the ball techniques, I think it's going to give me a bit more opportunity to try those so that when it comes to an international game, I can try that a bit more. But yeah, in terms of the challenge, it's pretty daunting initially. I think you're playing against players who've seen every trick you've got, and they know how to beat it. So you need to think about how can you get better each time. And I haven't had the chance to listen to Sean's one yesterday around how to coach. But some of the stuff I've worked on with Sean is situational, studying how team play, like we said earlier, but also if you're in this matchup, how are you going to exploit it? Coming back again to, like I said, around getting those markups against individual players. A lot of the video analysis I'll do will also focus on that and how I can look for different gaps. If that's not for you, I think it's just practicing what you're good at and knowing that when you're on the court, visualization, how are you going to do different things in different positions. Yeah, massive challenge.
Okay, so Paul's asked, I think this links back to last week's one with Mark and Ben, is that we heard from 2 data analysts last week. From a player's perspective, how do you find it, and has analysis helped change anything significantly in your game?
So from my experience with analysis, it's often been more at a team level than an individual level. I think I will review myself at an individual level, and I'll have conversations with managers around that. I think it'll often be from stuff that I've noticed or patterns that are coming out in my game, which the coach has identified. And hopefully having that video analysis can draw the right things out in terms of what they're seeing on the court. There's not been, to my knowledge, I haven't seen it, if there has been statistics around that, around you only capture the ball successfully in this quadrant compared to this quadrant. You need to land on it more face forwards with your left foot compared to your right foot. I think that kind of stuff can blow some people's minds. Personally, I find that very interesting. But yeah, I am excited to see what those guys have to offer in particular. I think one interesting thing that I have heard is speaking to Vlad, who used to play for Helvetia. A lot of you will have known about Vlad, very formidable character. When he plays with Lithuania, they have a guy, and they have a video analysis as well, but their main thing is they'll rate each player on every individual action that they do, positive, minus, half a point, 1 point. So as a pivot, it's do you secure the ball, 1 point? Do you lose the ball, minus a point? And it's all the different things that will go into what they've classified as a good performance. They'll rate them, and at the end of the game, they get an overall score. So from that side, I think the analysis is very in depth, but it kind of gives them a metric that they can work with. Whereas analysis in pure video analysis form is quite perceptive and subjective. So I think it's not one or the other. It's probably a balance, but I don't know.
Wicked. So, a few more questions. One's from David. He put, I coach an under-10s team. Does every adult futsal team play with a pivot? And would you recommend introducing the concept of a pivot at under-10 age?
Good evening, David. I think, not every team has players with a pivot. No, I think a lot of teams play 4-0 or 3-1. You tend to see, I know there's another presentation around how the teams use the fly keeper. I think, you've seen one or two teams do that in the last few years, and that wouldn't necessarily fall into the 3-1 or 4-0 category either. Historically, 2-2 or even 1-3, some crazy teams. So, a formation, like I said, it's an idea of playing, but ultimately positions the fluid on the court. I think if I'm working with a younger group, I think I'd encourage them to work on the different techniques we've spoken about. So they can be transferable to regardless of what position you're working on. But also, the players are ultimately going to get in that situation at some point in the game. There's no way that if you're through on goal or you've got a situation to play the ball into the player who's behind the backman, you're not going to play it because he's not a pivot. The players can see that space and identify it, regardless of their age, and they're giving them the tools that they need. So once they're in that position, how to create that space and generate a shot or whatever it is. I think that's what I'd focus on in terms of actually giving the players a strict formation. I think I've seen it applied. I haven't personally done that either way. But I'm happy if anyone wants to come back on the chat with answers to that. But I don't think I'd focus too much on it. It gives them an idea, but I don't think it's critical.
Class. So we've got a question from Cookie, a good friend. What do you think has improved you over the years? What lessons have been important throughout your progression as a fix, false pivot, both on and off the ball?
Evening, Cookie. So what have I improved? I think probably the areas I've improved have been try to implement the rollout a lot more, as I never did that initially when I started playing. So from a pure technical level, being able to do that, fighting to secure the ball. Like I said, the challenge stepping up to international level. When you come there, the fight to keep the ball is a lot harder. So learning to actually do that. Lost a lot of balls, probably continue to lose a lot of balls in my quest to be actually good at that. And I think as well, it's tricky because I've learned a lot from Cookie as well individually. It's working with the individual players. What do they want from you as a pivot, and what do you want from them? Being able to have that communication, actually know what you're asking for, I think makes a difference. Being able to know, is he going to be able to disguise this pass to me? Is he even looking for this pass to me because he knows I'm going to be there? Those sort of things I think I'm definitely more aware of nowadays, and I do try and bring them out. Obviously, the more I can play with Cookie, the more I can work on those. In terms of actual lessons, I think I've learned a hell of a lot, definitely from specific players as well as coaches. I've seen Parksy play at that level, seen him absolutely dominate international backmen with his strength and his ability to turn and shoot on both feet. I think that was definitely an influence. Looking at how Ray can secure the ball, threaten, dribbles, score goals. Taught me to, you need to always be a threat. You can't just be passive in games. You have to actually try and influence and implement your game on other players. Adam Oldham, I played with him at Sheffield. Taught me, you just got to be big and physical sometimes, and just try and dominate a player if you can. And I'm by far the most imposing of characters, but if I can actually get that advantage, I'll try and use that in a game. In terms of actually progressing from a fix to a winger to false, I kind of floated around the court. Again, coming back to the fact that I think skills should be transferable if you're trying to learn all the different elements. I did start off as a pivot and I moved to a winger. Kind of as my overall fitness improved actually, rather than a conscious decision, I was able to just offer more from a dynamic perspective. I think becoming a false has taught me something else as well in terms of how to try and help the team. When we have that good and bad pressure at the international level, how I can come around and support more. I need to understand when to do that at the right times, probably a bit better, and when to try and hold myself more as a fix. But that's probably one of the main things I'm working on at the minute.
So Bradley's asked, any suggestions of people around the game that you found useful on Twitter, and have you got an account?
Evening, Bradley. I do have an account. It's at Ricardo Wardes. That's my Spanish alias. In terms of who to learn from on Twitter, I mean, I've never really hammered Twitter in terms of looking for information in that sense. Just kind of get sent funny videos really from people. But I think YouTube has been probably my best outlet. You know, so many resources there. I think just even searching LNFS, Liga Nacional de Football Sala, you can see all their highlight videos. If you just got 5-10 minutes, you can find the best futsal there is there and see different things, see different patterns. Take that away into your life, no matter what your perspective with futsal is, and try and implement that in your way. And I think that's probably helped me a lot as well. Coming back to Cookie's question on how I've improved, you know, falling in love with the game, finding a team that I really like their style of playing, and taking that from there, I think really helped me.
And then Charlie, I'm not sure which Charlie it is, but it's asked at international. Yeah, probably international level. How much more important is it to be able to play more than just your position? In the NFS, standard is pretty poor, and most of the time you can stay in your position pretty much the whole time you're on. How different is it at international level?
That's a scathing indictment there by Charlie Kuhn. I think being flexible obviously is a benefit. I think there's a difference between being a John O'Shea, being able to play in every position, but not actually mastering one or being a dominating force in a position. I think would stand against you. Ultimately, it depends on the manager that you're playing with. Again, if that's going to stand you in good stead or not. I think just trying to develop the tool set to be able to do as much as you can, regardless of position, I think is important. And then understanding the tactical side of the game. Not only will it help you if you do want to be a fix, if you know how to play a winger or pivot or whatever it is, but you can actually appreciate their perspective if you're playing with the ball. So I think try and do it where you can, but I wouldn't. It's not like you have to train to be a right back from being a centre back. I think in futsal, it's fluid.
Class. Quality Wardy. I've got one final question for you from a personal point before you go. And it's more based around, I think you highlighted it before about Alex and Ferral. And I think what you're looking at there, you mentioned it before, is more the modern pivot. And what you mentioned there about having the skill set from those other positions that you've then taken it into is probably really interesting looking if people go away now and look at the old pivots from the early 2000s, like the Betau and people like that were strong, powerful, and didn't really move around the court as much. How do you think the pivot has changed over the last few years? Say, for example, a domestic international level, you're looking at Ferrao is probably a lot more dynamic than what the old pivots were. Alex is a lot more dynamic. Domestically, you've got yourself and Calvin, which offer that double threat of not just being able to hold up the ball, but can turn and face somebody 1v1 and offers that double threat. How do you think that's changed? And it's important to coach the 1v1 aspects as well as all the other aspects. So when you become that pivot, you have a lot more threat, a lot more tools and weapons in your to be able to go onto that international level and really challenge them as well.
It's a good question. I'll answer part of that question. In terms of how it's changed, I think as part of my kind of getting clips together for this session, I did a lot of stuff looking at Paulo Roberto in particular, who's probably considered one of the best pivots from the last 30 years in LNFS. And he was your out and out pivot, but he still had that 1v1 in him. He scored a lot of bicycle kicks though, so if you're into that, do definitely YouTube Paulo Roberto because that guy scored some crazy goals. But in terms of how that position's evolved, it just seems, I think, overall tactically the game has just gone on leaps and bounds. Defending is definitely probably the area that's forced to pivot to change what they do. I think you see the old clips and the pivots always in front of the back man. Very rarely that you'll see the defender cutting out the ball. They kind of let them do it a lot more, I think. So, like you said, being able to develop that 1v1 threat, I think, has become probably the biggest thing. But ultimately, I think every player now needs to be able to do that at any level. Definitely trying to get better at an international level. I think having some tools in the trade, a trick to go to, or something that you're trying to do to beat your opposition number, I think is something that we can definitely continue to work on at a national level. Some of you will have seen the recent games we had, Moldova and Israel, and I think we could have at times threatened a bit more individually, and I think we could have got better results if we'd done that. So definitely being able to have that 1v1 threat is important. But then, within the team framework, how do you implement that? How do you work with your other players? All the questions that have come up so far, that then influences it. So in terms of the actual change, definitely, right, it's the 1v1 element. But that in turn extends to the fact that the pivot needs to know when his teammate has the 1v1, he knows he has a superiority. He needs to clear out. He needs to clear off and be on the second post, give the guy the space. And I'm sure there's loads of other things like that, but that's a whole thing in itself. Evolution of the pivot. I nominate Calvin to do that one.
Okay, I'll try and convince Calvin to do that one for us then. Right, I wasn't going to ask one more question, but Russell's as he's your best mate, and he's probably given you countless assists as well. I'm going to let him finish on the final one, which is, as a pivot, what would you want from a winger?
Russ classifying himself as a winger there.
Yeah,
he's flexible. So I think, looking at, I watch Diego play, and he can always find the pivot. Pivot gets half a yard, he's already found the pass through the gap. I think the key thing for me would be, you can get him if you want. Sorry, Ron's making an appearance, already by popular demand. I think from a winger, I want the winger to be a threat. If the winger can be a threat, the winger can face someone up, and I know the winger can beat his man. I can clear off, I can be second post, or I can come inside, and I can be an option for the pass inside for the set. Totti, Helvetia, great example of this, and then I could pick loads of other players. I've already spoken about Cookie, Calvin, when he comes around as a winger, always does that. I know that they're going to come round and they're going to look to threaten in between and try and score a goal. That makes their defence back off. Makes their backman have to cover him in some aspect, or it creates space for me as a pivot. When I've got space, that's what I want. I want the winger to give me space. So I think what Russ can work on in his session on wingers is how he can beat a man down the line, how he can disguise a pass, how he can do all those other things that feed into how he's beaten his player. If I can just worry about standing on the second post and tapping balls in all day, I'll do that. Played at Helvetia last year, I think I scored 20 goals just from standing on the second post because a lot of players were better and superior in their 1v1s. So if you can just stand on the second post and tapping goals, that's what I want. More assists, please, Russell.
And we'll leave it on that note then. Cheers, Wardy, for doing that. I say appreciate it. I'm sure everybody else has. If you've got any more questions, I'm sure Wardy will be happy to pop them over to him privately. He's pops out his Twitter handle there, so feel free to add him on Insta as well. But as I say, appreciate it a lot. Hopefully everybody's taken a lot of stuff away from it. And hopefully see you back again next week. We'll post out the speakers for next week soon. Good lineup ahead again, and hopefully see you back again soon. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers, Jan.